Welcome to Full Exposure on Location, coming to you from Jump in Austin, Texas at the 2019 South by Southwest Film Festival. We have some fabulous guests on tap. Conversations with directors and cinematographers of some of the most inventive, funny, moving, and important documentary and narrative indie films that screen here in Austin. Join us at South by Southwest. I'm your host, Jim Kamp. Cinematographer Josh Silfen dreamed of making movies from an early age, which eventually led him to NYU Film School to study cinematography. He met director Emily Ting through mutual friends at NYU and has collaborated with her on shorts, commercials, and her first feature. Emily Ting's second feature, Go Back to China, premiered at South by Southwest recently and follows a spoiled Chinese American who is compelled to return to mainland China to work in her father's toy factory. Hey, Josh. Thanks for coming. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Sorry Emily couldn't make it, although it's good circumstances that she couldn't make it because of her expecting child.
Yeah, she's like 8.5 months pregnant with twins. So
oh, wow. I didn't know it was twins.
Yeah, apparently
wow.
They can come early.
Yeah.
And the doctors did not want her flying here. She went to film school. That's how I met her.
You guys met at NYU?
Mm-hmm. And after film school, she was working in New York, trying to get work in film, and it was kind of tough. And meanwhile, she was kind of being supported by her dad, and who has like a toy business back in China. And he told her to come back and work for the family business, and she felt a familial obligation to do that. So she went back there and started learning the toy business, and this story is kind of about that experience. In terms of like actual shooting locations, I'm not sure off the top of my head, but there were quite a few. I mean, the main ones were the factory and her father's house, which is her father's actual house in real life. The factory is their business's actual factory. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a little surreal working in such a blend of like real life and the fictionalized version of it, but yeah, those were the primary ones. And then we shot about 5 days in LA because Sasha at the beginning lives in LA, and then we shot for a few days in Hong Kong and 2 or 3 weeks in Shenzhen.
What kind of challenges did you have as a DP?
Certainly working with the local crew there was a little bit more challenging. I mean, the crew we worked with was Hong Kong based, and they did speak some English, but not everyone did, just some people did, and it wasn't perfect English. So, I mean, not that I'm blaming them. I mean, I don't speak any Cantonese, so, but yes, I mean, also some of the equipment that was available there. Yeah, it was like we don't have the same selection as we do in LA, certainly. Right. And I didn't necessarily know the names of every light or things like that. So when I would ask for stuff, it was about a 50-50 proposition whether the thing that showed up would be the same thing I asked for. But sometimes it worked better than what I had imagined. So it all ended up working.
Did you get like acquainted with what the interchangeable jargon was for what you were looking for?
Yeah, I mean, we had like
LEDs
generic, generic terms for things like, just that circular LED light or whatever. On the LA portion, literally every light we used was an LED, which is like the first time that I've done that. And I mean, the gaffer I was working with knowing it was a small crew, knowing it was a small budget thing, right. We didn't have a generator, right. He just thought it would be easier to make sure every single light could plug into a household outlet, right. And be, dimmable, color, temperature, changeable, all that stuff.
Were the CRIs kind of all different?
Well, that's the thing, is like we had really good gear in LA, and they have a ton of lights that are really nice. So we use sky panels, we use the Airy L7s and L5s, We used light mats, things like that, which all have very good CRI.
Yeah.
And then when we got to China, Hong Kong and China, we were they didn't have nearly that kind of selection. We did use a lot of, HMIs and tungsten lights as well, but the LEDs we had did not have the same kind of quality that the ones we could get in LA did. So even though I liked relying on LEDs because they're so flexible and they can, put out as little light as you need, which sounds, like that's not necessarily a feature, but it really is, because especially when you're working with a camera that, has very good light sensitivity, a lot of times you're working at a very high ISO and you need to be able to get very little out of a light sometimes, which, a lot of the LEDs now can do. So I didn't have quite as much flexibility with that, but then when we did have an LED, the gaffer would always warn me that it wasn't the best looking light, or they'd have to do some very strange combination of, plus or minus green gels on there to kind of get it to even attempt to try to match anything else, whereas we didn't really have that problem with the stuff we had in LA. I mean, we worked around it. I mean, I believe a lot in what can be accomplished in the color correction process, so I try not to get too wrapped up in whether every single light matches perfectly, because I know what I can do in post.
Yeah. Well, plus I'm guessing if you're shooting in a factory too, you're kind of looking for a cooler, greener, almost.
Well, it's partly the look we're looking for, but it's also partly, we just didn't have the budget, the equipment, or the crew to light those from scratch. So we're using the really ugly fluorescent lights that are there, as kind of a base, and then we add to that. But those are really green, and they don't all match. There's warm ones, there's cool ones. We also have windows with daylight coming in, and some of the windows had weird blue coatings on
Film
them.
or something.
So we knew we were working in a very mixed lighting environment, and we were prepared for that. And in the end, I think it looks fine, but yes, it's a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
But we had to match our lights more to that than it was I want this to have a very cool look, so let's make sure they're all at 5500 or something like that.
Yeah.
The other thing is people just assume because we're shooting in an actual factory that what we're shooting is what the factory looks like, but that's not 100% true, because we did production design in the factory quite a bit, and we painted all the walls to match the color scheme of the film. We a lot of times it was a working factory, so they'd be making whatever toys they happened to be making at the time, but if it was red and green toys, it didn't really match what we were going for. So we'd have them, bag all those up and then bring out the pink toys or the teal toys just to fit more in line with kind of the look we were going for. And the factory workers in the movie all wear these teal uniforms with yellow hats. In real life, they don't wear any uniform at all, but it just made it look a lot more filmic to have a little bit more consistency there. So there's the scene where she walks in and looks around for the first time, and there's we tilt up to the big overdone mural on the ceiling behind the chandelier, and those rooms were very difficult to light because A, they're really big, and B, when you're doing shots like that kind of are meant to show the whole room, there's not a lot of places to hide stuff. So that's another reason. And the living room, which we shot a lot of scenes in, was basically 2 stories tall, and there was kind of a mezzanine with a balcony. But it wasn't that vast of a space in terms of the width of it. So there was not really a lot of place to hide lights on the floor. If we weren't tilting up to the ceiling, we could kind of hang some lights over the balcony, but our lights weren't necessarily big or powerful enough to do everything we need from so high and so far away. But at the same time, we couldn't really have a lot of stuff on the floor except in close-ups because, there just wasn't a lot of places to hide stuff. And we were shooting in the widescreen aspect ratio.
Oh, gosh.
We had a few big scenes. We had the party scene where she goes to the club. That was a lot of fun to shoot because we shot at this like standing set that was just made to look like a club. And we brought in, the airy sky panels were really useful for that because we could use the RGB settings to make them any color. So we would match like all the chaser lights and all the stuff that they had at the club. And, we had smoke going, we had all these lights. I mean, that was like a lot of fun to shoot. And we had all day there. So it was plenty of time to do it. And most of the LA shoot was like that. I mean, we had a few company moves, but for the most part, we'd be doing one main location per day or maybe two smaller locations. Whereas, once we got to China, we were in several locations for a long time, but so much more of the movie takes place there that it was a lot more rushed, and there was a lot of characters to cover in every scene, and that felt a lot more like a typical indie shoot where, even though the total length of time of 21 days or whatever is not uncommon for an indie shoot, this one was pretty challenging in that regard, especially for the Chinese stuff, just because there's so many scenes with so many characters, and when you add characters to a scene, the amount of coverage that kind of goes up exponentially with each one. So we pretty much used ZEISS Ultra Primes most of the time. Actually, on the first part of the LA shoot, we had some ZEISS Super Speeds because that's kind of what came with the package we were renting. But I don't know, it's just so much harder to pull focus on the older lenses that even when we did the reshoots in LA, we got the Ultra Primes again. But and the other thing is, like, the nice thing about the Super Speeds is how fast they are, but if you're shooting at 1.3 or 1.4, it's really hard to keep stuff in focus, and the Ultra Primes look really sharp even wide open at 1.9. So I feel like there's not that much of a downside. Yes, you don't have the potential for that one more stop, but it's not really a stop you want to be using anyway because it's so hard to keep your subject in focus. And as long as the Ultra Primes are sharp at that stop, then those are fine. Plus, working with the Sony cameras where the ISO looks good even really high, I could always get a little bit more stop that way without having to go to 1.4. So I tried to avoid that anyway, so that we didn't really get much of extra benefit from the Super Speeds other than they were a little cheaper.
How was the widest you shot?
Probably wide open on the. I tried to shoot at 2.8 most of the time, or 2.8.5, but I think we probably shot some stuff at 2 or 1.9.
Well, Josh, thank you so much for coming in. Really appreciate it. Give Emily our best, and we're glad you could make it.
Glad I could too. Thank you so much for having me.
Appreciate it. That's all for now on Full Exposure from South by Southwest. In Austin, MJ Johnson was our director of photography. Dan Walnicki audio engineered and edited. Huda Khalid associate produced. A very special thanks to Laurie Welts at Film Fatales for introducing us to the filmmakers who appeared on the show.